I'm Matthew Morine from the Castle Rock congregation. I appreciate you guys listening to this presentation on natural evangelism, ministering from the mountains. I grew up in Nova Scotia, Canada as a heathen. I had no religious background, and I became friends with the preacher's family, actually the preacher's daughter, who started to invite me to church. And you would think I was there because of her. I really wasn't. I was there because the family would feed me anything I wanted. And so it was fantastic. I would put in my order for ribeye steaks or lobster, and then the family would cook it for me for the Sunday meal. So if I came to the morning worship, then they would feed me lunch, and if I was working at KFC Chicken and I could come to the evening service, then they would feed me my meal at supper time. And I loved it. But I remember starting to study with her father, and I was really fascinated by Christianity. And I had to help the family, or the preacher's daughter asked me if I would be willing to move the family down to Texas. He was going to work down there. And I had one problem. I had a girlfriend, and I called up my girlfriend, and I said, hey, the preacher's daughter, Natasha, wants me to go down to Texas with her to help move her family. And I was just wondering how you felt about that. I'm going to be gone for about a month with this other girl. Any thoughts? Well, she gave me an ultimatum. She looked at me and she said, it's me or the trip to Texas. Well, in my 19-year-old mature brain, I realized something. I could get another girlfriend, but another free trip to Texas was probably not going to happen, so we broke up, and I went down to Texas. And in Texas, I was baptized. What's fascinating is that started my journey of wanting to spread the gospel. And then I started going to different schools, and I ended up writing my dissertation on how can local congregations get into the community and be a presence for Christ. So I took my experience being a non-Christian and coming to the Lord, and then all that I have seen through my many years of being a minister in our local congregations, as well as all the intensive study for the dissertation through the academia. And I brought that together, and I wrote this book called Natural Evangelism to help the individual Christian be more evangelistic in a postmodern world. I remember bad evangelism when I was actually in Camp Bandina, and some of you probably have been there. I love that camp. But when I was there, I was a real non-Christian from Canada. Now think about how exciting that would be for this one young man who won male camper every year. Like, this kid was Bible boy extraordinaire. And he knew if he could get me to be baptized at camp, he was going to get his name on that plaque again. And so every single day he badgered me. You want to get baptized? Hey, you want to study about baptism? Have you been pondering baptism? Hey, look, there's lemonade. What hinders you? It's made from water. And it just annoyed me. And I remember in my mind, and I didn't even know that much about baptism, but I remember in my mind thinking, I'm not going to get baptized just because of that guy. He was trying to sell me the gospel and not really share his story. And what's fascinating is I left camp on Saturday, and on Sunday morning, I woke up and I wanted to be baptized. And so Brian Garnett, who works at the Sunset School of Preaching, he baptized me, and it changed my life. But one guy, I felt like he was just doing it so he could win an award, because that's what he felt like he had to do. Where Brian, he loved me, and he was investing in me. How we evangelize is so important. My camp experience talks about how it's a clear example of how bad evangelism can halt good evangelism. Let's look at an example of good evangelism from John chapter 4, verse 5 to 7. Look at what it says, and you guys know this story very well. So he came to the city of Samaria called Sychar, near the parcel of ground that Jacob gave to his son Joseph. And Jacob's well was there. Jesus, therefore, being wearied from his journey, was sitting thus by the well. It was the 6th hour. There came a woman of Samaria to draw water. Jesus said to her, "Give me a drink." Now, we know this story, and we are very familiar with it. He is talking to this woman, and this woman is coming during the middle of the day. And classically, we have understood that in the sense that maybe she doesn't have the best reputation. And she's drawing water during the hottest part of the day because she's not really accepted in society. But Jesus has this ability to connect the gospel to people's life, where he asks her for this water, and she's like, well, how are you going to get this water? And he leads her to the understanding of, I don't look for physical water, I have spiritual water. And it draws her in. And she wants to learn more about this living water. I remember studying with a lady, and good evangelism is connecting the gospel to people's needs. And she came in and she was struggling with what she believed to be voices or evil spirits attacking her. And her solution was she would take a rock and she taped it to her ceiling, and that was going to protect her from these evil spirits. Well, I didn't look at her and say, oh, that's nuts. That's crazy. That's never going to work. I looked at her in the study and said, I have a solution that will protect you from those evil spirits. Now, I wasn't thinking of a rock. I knew we could have the power of the Holy Spirit working in our lives. We got to connect the gospel to where people are, because people have genuine, real needs. And when they see that the gospel will speak into those needs, that's when they're hungry to listen some more. This is what happens with this lady. The Samaritan woman therefore said to him, how is it that you, being a Jew, ask me for a drink, since I'm a Samaritan woman? For Jews have no dealings with Samaritans. John 4:9. So Jesus breaks with tradition here, because typically the Jewish males would not speak to the ladies, and definitely not to a lady of her reputation. And we think that it's so hard to reach out and connect with people like this. But I don't think that's always the case. Now, there's a video that I'm going to play here. And if we can get this video lined up, it'd be fantastic. But you're going to see this video. And it seems like today we are so scared of just having a spiritual conversation, of just talking about Christ. It's like we won't go anywhere. We won't go across the street. We won't go across the cul-de-sac to even speak to somebody. But I want to show you this video, because here is a picture of me. I have this yellow backpack on, and I'm going across the knife's edge. And since I was assigned the topic of ministering from the mountains, I thought I'd better show you some mountain videos. So if we could play this video. Now, this is Jake here, right here, and then that's me, and we're going over what is called a 14er, and that means it's a 14,000-foot mountain. And this 14er is called Capitol Peak. And right there on this GoPro that my friend Martin has on his helmet is a picture of the knife's edge. And looking down, as you can see, that's about 1,000 vertical feet. So think about New York and think about a skyscraper. And I'm on this ledge. And if I fall, I splat and I'm dead. And it's about 40 feet across this. And I'm going to kind of get on there. I'm going to side saddle it. and I'm going to scoot across this knife's edge. If we can go across these knife's edges, if we can go across this mountain and climb this mountain that in 2017, I know 5 people died on it, I think we can go and have some spiritual conversations. If we can do amazing things in our lives, if we can accomplish our goals, is it really that hard to talk to somebody about Jesus? Some people watch this video and they get a little bit of scared of heights, and I've had somebody throw up, so if you feel like throwing up, you might need to look away. But there's 1,000 feet down there. I just want to make the point. We can muster up the courage to go talk to somebody about Jesus. If we can climb over the knife's edge, I think we can go share Jesus. This is what Jesus does. He talks to people. Look at John 4:10-11. Jesus answered and said to her, "If you knew the gift of God and who it is who says to you, 'Give me a drink,' you would have asked him, and he would have given you living water." She said to him, "Sir, I have nothing to draw with, and the well is deep. Where then do you get this living water?" He told her, "Go, call your husband and come back." "I have no husband," she replied. Jesus said to her, "You are right when you say you have no husband. The fact is, you have had 5 husbands, and the man you now have is not your husband." "What you have just said is quite true, sir," the woman said. "I can see that you are a prophet." Now imagine you in this situation. He knows that she has been married 5 times. And the man that she's with now is not her husband, but she's living with him. If you saw this lady at the grocery store, if you learned of this lady, what would be some of your first impressions? Would you consider her to be a sinner or sinned against? Because our perceptions of people in evangelism make a huge difference. Now, in the context, more than likely, she doesn't have the power in first century society to divorce all these men. So it could have been she has been put away. She has been divorced by these men. More than likely, she might have been divorced, or some of these men have died. So imagine her having all of these husbands, some of them mistreating her, putting her away. Others maybe perhaps died. But the key is, this is not a modern American woman who has the power to get all of these divorces or to have all of these husbands. She is not preying on men. More than likely, she has been sinned against. That these men have used her and put her away. And then even the man that she's living with now will not marry her. And so he's taking advantage of her. Because in first century society, she has limited choices of what she can do to provide for herself. She's not this wicked woman. She's maybe a victim. Well, that changes how you approach her. If you look at her as more of a victim, we have compassion for her. But if we look at her through the American mindset of an empowered woman, we would have the mindset of condemnation. Now think about how, if you are sharing the gospel with a lady like this, how you would approach it. If you condemned her, you would probably come with more of a heart posture of judgment. That, how dare you, you sinner, you need to get right with God. But if you had a heart posture of compassion, let me share with you the saving message of Jesus Christ. Because you need to feel loved. Because these men perhaps may not have loved her. They have used her. For us to be good, natural evangelists, we have to have the right heart posture. Because if we are just evangelizing from the mindset of condemnation, we come from a mindset of judgment. But if we see people who have been struggling in life, we come with a heart of compassion. Think about yourself. If somebody approached you with the gospel and they came with the mindset of condemnation, do you think you would be pulled in by that? Do you think that would be enticing to you? But if someone came to you with the heart of compassion, I think you'd be a lot more receptive to the message of Christ. The way we do this is to tell our story. And our stories are so important. And I want to give you some practical tools to do this. So Jesus comes in and creates this desire for her to know. His heart posture is correct. And then he gets into her story. And the key to get other people to tell us their story in our society is to tell our story. And the way to do this is what I call the AIM principle. To be authentic, to create interest, and talk about how God has made a difference. So the idea of being authentic means start with weakness. Start with something that you have struggled with in your life. And then look to take that and connect it to an interest or a struggle that they have had. Nobody wants to hear you tell your story of, I was raised in the church, I was perfect, my parents were perfect, we had perfect children, we had a perfect family, and we lived in a perfect community in a perfect church. Because first of all, you're lying. And second of all, people cannot relate to that. You have to talk about a struggle you had and how God has made a difference. And then if you know what they're dealing with, or perhaps what they're going through, try to connect it to something that they have an interest in. But the key is, you have to move them from that Christ has made a difference in your life, and Christ can make a difference in the person you're evangelized life as well. So what difference, or how has Christ made what you have struggled with better? Because that's what they're looking for. They're looking for practical solutions to the difficulties in their world. You see this kind of in Acts chapter 22. But you got to move them to tell their story through the 3 levels of interaction. When you first meet somebody, there's usually this fake conversation. You know, how you doing? I'm doing great. You know, how was your day? Oh, it's wonderful. And they may be going through a really hard season, but there's no way they're going to share that with you. They're not going to open up. And so when we tell our AIM story, we're trying to get them to move to the next level of where they start to share some facts. And facts is the weather, sports, and kind of events. Things that aren't really emotionally charged. They're just facts. But then the third level is feelings. And that's where evangelism can take place. So if you're sharing the gospel with somebody and you start talking about Jesus and they are just not opening up at all, there's no sense of continuing to try to be evangelistic with them. They're not trusting enough in the relationship for you to get in there and share your feelings and have them share their feelings as well. So it's kind of an idea of seeing where the soil is and where their heart is. Then if they start sharing facts, you're moving the relationship a little farther. But you got to get to the level of feelings for evangelism to really take place. Where they start talking about, you know, I've been feeling sad, or I was happy, or I was depressed. But you need them to share how they feel about something, not just the fake or the facts. What happens in evangelism in some places where somebody will sit down and want to talk about the gospel, And all it turns in is a debate or a fight about religion. They're at the facts stage. They're not really receptive until you see them share some feelings. So look for that in evangelism. Why is that? It's because of this fancy concept of the Kantian noumena phenomenon divide. I know that's a big mouthful, and I know that's really complex, but it's really kind of simple to understand, and everybody can understand this idea. In the 1700s, as one of the features of the Western Enlightenment, German philosopher Immanuel Kant divided what we know into two realms of knowledge, the noumenal and the phenomenal. The noumenal is the realm of God, ethics, and values. It contains statements such as, there is love, I feel happy, hockey is better than football, which is true. The phenomenal, on the other hand, is the realm of facts, evidence, and data. It contains statements such as 1 + 1 = 2, the sky is blue, water boils at 100 degrees Celsius. In the first century, you didn't have this divide. All information was part of the same core of knowledge. So you couldn't have a separation of the spiritual and the physical. But with the enlightenment of Western civilization, now people don't like to bridge this gap. And so they'll talk about facts all day long, but they feel uncomfortable talking about religion because of this Kantian noumenal phenomenal divide. That's why when you are sharing the gospel, sometimes people don't want to engage in that because they've been taught by Western enlightenment not to talk about religion and politics because these are emotionally charged issues. And there's that separation that causes them not to be receptive. So we got to break down this barrier and to be able to bring Christ into our conversations. Paul does this in Acts chapter 22 when he shares his story of salvation. Now look at Acts 22, 1-5. Paul shared information about what he did and thought before becoming a Christian. Then he continues in Acts 22, 6-11. Paul creates tension in his story. Jesus appears to him. So all of a sudden you have this guy and he's saying, I'm a Pharisee of Pharisees, I'm a Hebrew, I'm totally dedicated to Old Testament religion. But then all of a sudden Jesus, the same guy I have been persecuting, comes to me, appears to me and says, what are you doing, Paul? Now, do you want to hear what's going to happen next? Of course you do. And then he goes into and he highlights the impact that Christ has made in his life in Acts 22, 12-22. He talks about the new mission that Christ is going to give to him to reach the Gentiles. So here's this guy who won't have anything to do with Gentiles, who thinks that these Gentiles are despicable in the sight of God. And God, Jesus, appears to him, tells him, you need to stop persecuting me, and now you need to go and evangelize the Gentiles. You have a really important point here. Jesus was willing to talk to somebody that nobody expected him to talk to. And Paul now becomes willing to talk to people nobody expects him to talk to. If we want to be evangelistic, we got to talk to some people that nobody expects us to talk to. But he shares his story, and it provides an opportunity. So you have to think about your aim story. If somebody asked you, why are you a Christian? Why do you do this? What would you tell them? What is your aim story? So where would you lead off with? Notice that when I started this presentation, I told you quickly my story. I was a heathen. And then I told them about how I was saved. It was a very generic way, but you could go even more specific. What has Christ done in your life? And be authentic and start with weakness. Create interest and talk about the difference that Christ has made in your life. We do this by learning the art of turning a conversation to Christ. I like this scripture here in Acts chapter 16, verse 25. And we know this story. And it talks about the Philippian jailer asked Paul this question. And we love this question in the church. What must I do to be saved? And we automatically assume that he's asking, how can I become a Christian? But maybe that's not really what's happening here. You have Paul and Silas singing songs of praise to the Lord. And at first glance, it seems like, of course, he's looking to be baptized. But I'm not too sure about this. I think there's two meanings. The guard might have been wondering what he could do to be saved from the execution because of his failure of keeping the prisoners in jail. Remember, there's this earthquake. All of a sudden, all the people in jail flee, but these two men stay. And he knows if Paul and Silas leave, he's dead. He's getting a spear through his body. Because that's the punishment for a Roman jailer who loses his inmates. So he's asking, what must I do to be saved? What must I do to keep you from not running away? But then Paul chooses to answer the eternal question of how he can do more than just protect his physical life, but how he can have an eternal life. He takes the physical and moves it to the spiritual. He connects it. This is what we have to do in a postmodern society. We got to connect to culture and find the existential cry. Every culture has a way of expressing its God-given existential cry for transcendence, meaning, community, love, freedom, forgiveness, intimacy, uniqueness, connection, usefulness, approval, harmony, wisdom, and redemption. So everybody's on this journey, but we have to take them from the physical to the spiritual. Because we live in a postmodern world, what we used to do is called foundationalism. And foundationalism is where we would take one truth and stack another truth. So here's how we do it. There is a God who gave us the Bible, and the Bible talks about Jesus, and Jesus talks about how to be saved. And we stack them up. But in postmodern world, it's more of a structural process. So these are loosely connected truths that don't have to logically stack. They can just be believed in an isolated context. That means that you can believe Christianity and. So let me tell you a quick example. I was there up in the mountains and I met this lady and she was telling me about how Michael the archangel is her special protector. So she has this religious Christian vibe, but she also believes that there's Sasquatches that have been given to us to protect us. And the Sasquatches are in different dimensions, and just every now and then they come into our dimension. So she can hold some Christian beliefs in dimensional Sasquatches. From a Christian perspective, that doesn't make sense. But from her postmodern perspective, it does. And she believes that you have to have tolerance of that. She believes that all religions are valid and essentially the same. That there's no absolutes, no definitive truth. They're not convinced by proof or evidence. Postmodernity recognizes the diversities of knowing. Postmodernity is open to different perspectives of different cultures. And ethics have become a barrier to the gospel. Let me tell you an illustration of this. When I was living in Halifax, I'd get on the bus every single day, and I would sit there, and on the bus, I'd sit down, and there's one day these two college girls gets on. And I hear them talk about how one of them cheated on her boyfriend that weekend. Well, I was a brand new Christian. And I overheard this conversation, and I felt like this was an opportunity for me to infuse the gospel in conversation. And so I looked at him and I said, did you know that fornication is a sin? Now, I'm not sure if they knew what the word fornication was, but that was a new Bible word I learned. And so I made sure I explained it and I defined it. They listened to me kind of with perplexed looks as I am going into the fornication thing, and God doesn't want that. You shouldn't be cheating on your boyfriend. And then finally they got off, I got off, and I felt really good about myself that I brought Jesus into the conversation, and I was a great evangelist. You know, a lot of ministers want to talk to you about how they have been successful in evangelism. I like to tell you about how I've been unsuccessful. Because then, that afternoon, I got back on the bus. And there was one of the girls, not the fornicator, but the friend. And she came and she sat right next to me. And I thought, yes, she's going to want to be baptized now. She's going to want to learn more about this. I was waiting for her to look out and see water. I was wrong. I got the biggest chewing out of my life. She was so mad. I did not share the gospel. I offended them. And they didn't want anything to do with the gospel. Another time, a bad evangelism. I was in the grocery store after coming back from the preaching training school, and my mom was with me, and I saw this friend named Sean. And I see Sean, and Sean and I used to hang out. We had a lot of fun together. And he's like, Matthew, where have you been? I said, I've been in Texas. I'm learning to preach. And he said, be quiet. He didn't really say be quiet, but that's what I have to say to you, because he said something else. And I said, yeah, I'm preaching now. I'm in a preaching school. And he said, be quiet. And I said, it's true. He goes, it's not true. And then he said, be quiet. And I said, no, it's true. Finally, my mom is there, and she asked to vouch for me. She goes, no, he's actually at a preaching training school in Texas. And he said, be quiet. So I looked at my friend Sean, and I said, Sean, you need to come to church. You have to hear me preach. And he says, I don't know about that. And I said, Sean, you need to be at church because you're a heathen. Oh, my parents were not Christians back then. And my mom looked at me, and she was so mortified that I called my friend a heathen. And she's like, Matthew, you can't call your friends heathens. That's not very nice. You can't do that. Well, Sean looks at her and says, actually, no, miss, I am a heathen. And he actually showed up to church. But we can't go around calling people heathens. But that's what I thought was good evangelism. But Jesus, he knew how to evangelize. And he made a huge difference when you do it well. Look at what happens here at the end of this story in John chapter 4. So the woman left her water pot and went into the city and said to the men, come see a man who told me all the things that I have done. This is not the Christ, is it? They went out of the city and were coming to him. So Jesus connects with this woman, and he deals with her shame. Because shame is usually a blocker to the gospel. And people aren't going to go through that Kantian-Numenov divide because shame puts up the wall. But he breaks down the wall, he connects with her, creates that interest, and next thing you know, she becomes an evangelist for Christ. And they come out of the city, and notice what happens here. And from that city, many of the Samaritans believed in him because of the word of the woman who testified. He told me all the things that I have done. So when the Samaritans came to him, they were asking him to stay with them. And he stayed there 2 days. And many more believed because of his word. And they were saying to the woman, it is no longer because of what you said that we believe. For we have heard for ourselves and know that this one is indeed the Savior of the world. We can make a difference when we invite other people in and we are part of this process. I want to give you one final illustration before we close about how we can be the aroma of Christ. And I give you some practical ways of dealing with connecting the gospel, of not having preconceived ideas in evangelism. We talked about our AIM story of how we can turn a conversation around and bring in the gospel to it. We understood kind of the separation between the physical and the spiritual and why people don't want to talk about the gospel. But let me end with this illustration. My grandmother, when I was growing up, would make the best homemade bread. Loved her homemade bread. I'd go and put some butter on that, and it would come freshly from the oven. Oh, it was so tasty. Loved her homemade bread. And you could smell it, and it would be enticing, and I want to eat it. And I couldn't just eat one piece. I'd almost eat half of the loaf. But I have her recipe. Wrote it down on this card. And so I'm going to make you hungry right now. And I'm going to make you want that bread. Because here's the real thing. Here's the real recipe. So are you ready? Now, I know it's going to come through the video, but I know you're going to be enticed by it. Are you ready? Here I am. I'm waving the recipe. Waving the recipe at you. Can't you smell it? Don't you want it? Don't you want this bread? Are you not enticed? Probably not. Because it's just the recipe and it's not the bread. Sometimes in evangelism, what we do is we wave the recipe on how to be a Christian. And we get frustrated because nobody's enticed. Nobody is hungry for the gospel. Because all we're waving is the recipe and not the bread of life. To be a good evangelist, to be a natural evangelist, you have to have the aroma of Christ on you. You have to be able to smell the aroma of Christ in your life. That's what is enticing. That's how we become a natural evangelist. We got to move on from just waving the recipe, and we got to give people the bread of life. Appreciate you tuning in for this talk. And hopefully it was a blessing to you.